Good evening, everyone. It has been a beautiful day. I have definitely enjoyed this nice weather. I hope you have as well. And I am grateful to everyone who is here tonight, especially to any visitors that we may have. We are especially grateful to you for your attendance and glad that you have come, maybe even back to our PM service. We're glad to see you again. On Sunday nights right now, we are reading through the book of Job. We're getting very, very close to the end, and we are in Job chapter 34 and 35 tonight. And we are continuing with the speech of the young man Elihu. If you were here last time, we discussed the beginning of his speech. He was a young man who waited till the very end to finally toss in his opinion, his 2 cents. He wanted to wait till Job and his other 3 friends got done with their comments because they were older and wiser men, and he wanted to pay them that respect. But now he wants Job to listen to him and listen to what he has to say about Job and his condition, why he has lost everything, and why God is doing this to him. So I hope you'll follow along as we read through these 2 chapters very quickly tonight. And let's begin by reading chapter 34, verses 1 through 4. Elihu further answered and said, "Hear my words, you wise men. Give ear to me, you who have knowledge. For the ear tests words as the palate tastes food. Let us choose justice for ourselves. Let us know among ourselves what is good." Here at the beginning of this chapter, Elihu says to Job, he says basically, listen up, Job. I have something to say. And he says something that is very respectable, very true. He says that Job has knowledge and has understanding, and he invites Job to listen and to test Elihu's words. So what Elihu is doing here is something that is very good, very admirable. He doesn't just tell Job to listen to what I have to say and take what I have to say. But he tells Job to listen and to meditate on and to ponder upon what he has to say, to test those words that Elihu is going to speak to him. And truly, like we looked at this morning in Bible class, we do need to test all things, hold fast to what is good, 1 Thessalonians 5 and verse 21. We don't need to take what someone says as absolute truth. And Elihu understands that. And he invites Job to commune and to discuss the ideas that Elihu has about Job's condition. But in verse 5 through 9, we see him say some more things about Job that aren't necessarily right. He says, "For Job has said, I am righteous, but God has taken away my justice. Should I lie concerning my right? My wound is incurable, though I am without transgression. What man is like Job, who drinks scorn like water, who goes in company with the workers of iniquity and walks with the wicked men? For he has said, it profits man nothing that he should delight in God." Now here, Elihu, especially if you're looking at the New King James Version like we do on Sunday nights, here you see Elihu have some quotations that he makes, that Job says. In verse 7 and 8, though, we already see that Elihu is twisting Job's word. He already has a bias against Job, and it's very plain in these verses. He believes that Job is a sinner. And his reasoning seems to be, according to me, according to what I can understand of these scriptures, is what he quoted in verse 9. I believe Elihu misunderstands what Job was saying in verse 9, where he quotes Job to say, it profits a man nothing, then he should delight in God. I think Elihu thinks that Job is rejecting God and thinking to serve God is vain. But that's not at all what the statement Job is making. He is trying to make the statement that he knows that man is not always happy and fruitful in this life, even if he serves God, because life isn't fair. And just because I do what's right doesn't mean that I am going to have a happy life. But Elihu is taking what Job means and he's twisting it to say that Job is completely rejecting God. So automatically at the beginning of this chapter, we see Elihu's view of Job. But let's go on and read some more of what he says. Let's look now at verse 10 through 15. Therefore listen to me, you men of understanding. Far be it from God to do wickedness, and from the Almighty to commit iniquity. For he repays man according to his work, and he makes a man to find a reward according to his way. Surely God will never do wickedly, nor will the Almighty pervert justice, who gave him charge over the earth, or who appointed him over the whole world. If he should set his heart on it, if he should gather to himself his spirit and his breath, all flesh would perish together, and man would return to dust. If you have understanding, hear this. Listen to the sound of my words. Should one who hates justice govern, will you condemn him who is most just? Is it fitting to say to a king, you are worthless, and to nobles, you are wicked? Yet he is not partial to princes, nor does he regard the rich more than the poor, for they are all the work of his hands. In a moment they die. In the middle of the night, the people are shaken and pass away. The mighty are taken away without a hand. Now, this is where some of what these men are saying to Job is true, but what they try to apply it to is false. He's trying to say that Job is rejecting God, and that is a false accusation. But at 10 through 15, he makes a very correct statement. He correctly states that God does not do wickedness. That is absolutely true. God does not do things that are wrong. And God is not partial, nor does he pervert his judgment. But God repays man according to his work. Now, what Elihu and his friends are trying to imply is God repays man according to his work in this life. If I sin, then in this life I will have punishment for that sin. But Job is looking at the evidence and he's saying, no, that's not true. I myself am a righteous man, but I'm suffering. And so to serve God is not about being profitable. Because if I were to profit by serving God, then all these things would not happen to me. But that is not an absolute truth that we are prosperous in this life if we serve God. And those are things we've repeated, themes that have gone on throughout this entire book. That false idea that man is blessed in this life and does not suffer wrong in this life if he follows God. Then Job 34, 21 through 30. For his eyes are on the ways of man, and he sees all his steps. There is no darkness nor shadow of death where the workers of iniquity may hide themselves. For he need not further consider a man that he should go before God in judgment. He breaks in pieces mighty men without inquiry, and sets others in their place. Therefore he knows their works. He overthrows them in the night, and they are crushed. He strikes them as wicked men in the open sight of others, because they turn back from him and will not consider any of his ways, so that they cause the cry of the poor to come to him. For he hears the cry of the afflicted. When he gives quietness, who can then make trouble? And when he hides his face, who then can see him, whether it is against a nation or a man alone? That the hypocrite should not reign, lest the people be ensnared. A couple of points that he makes there, absolutely true. God knows everything, is what Elihu's saying here. He knows every person. He knows our thoughts. He knows our actions. We cannot hide from him. And I found it very interesting that he says in verse 22, we cannot hide from him in darkness, and we cannot even hide from God in death. Even in death, we are seen by God. Wherever we find ourselves in this life after this one, whether in torment or in paradise, God can still see us. And he knows where we are. And so we cannot hide ourselves from him. In verse 24 through 28, God breaks down the mighty and strikes the wicked for oppressing the poor. And then in verse 29, Elihu says that when God gives peace, no one can make trouble. And all of those things are absolutely, positively right. We cannot hide ourselves from God. We cannot change His will. And He can break down or build up whoever He wants. And if He gives peace, we all can have peace. And I think that's a very comforting thought, a very wonderful thought to think that what God does cannot be destroyed. And I can take pleasure and comfort in that if I am following Him. But now, the end of chapter 34, verse 31 through 37. For has anyone said to God, I have borne chastening, I will offend no more? Teach me what I do not see. If I have done iniquity, I will do no more. Should He repay it according to your terms just because you disavow it? You must choose and not I. Therefore speak what you know. Men of understanding say to me, wise men who listen to me. Job speaks without knowledge. His words are without wisdom. Oh, that Job were tried to the utmost, because his answers are like those of wicked men. For he adds rebellion to his sin. He claps his hands among us and multiplies his words against God. So there, Elihu finally just comes out and he says it very plainly. He condemns Job for sinning. And he says, Job, not only have you sinned, but you're claiming that you haven't sinned, and so you're rebellious. You're speaking wickedness. And he thinks that God will judge him and cast him down for what he has said. That is allegedly not true. But we know, as the Scripture tells us, that Job did what was right. He was a righteous man, and that Elihu and his friends are incorrect in saying that Job was a sin-filled man and that he was rebellious, when in fact he was telling the truth. Now let's go to chapter 35, verses 1 through 3 first. Moreover, Elihu answered and said, do you think this is right? Do you say, my righteousness is more than God's? For you say, what advantage will it be to you? What profit shall I have more than if I had sinned? I read this and found this very interesting. Here, Elihu asks if Job is saying that he is more righteous than God. He said, Job, are you saying that you're more righteous than God? No. Job has never, ever made such a statement. But even in this question, Elihu is accusing Job of implying such a statement, making such a position as to say that he is more righteous than God. However, Elihu misunderstands what Job meant by his statement in these verses. Job was simply calling into question that same belief that has been talked about over and over and over again. Are the righteous blessed in this life and the wicked punished? Job says, that doesn't seem to make sense to me. That doesn't fit with what's going on in my life. And yet we as men have held this principle to be true, and his friends obviously hold it to be true, yet the evidence is to the contrary. But Elihu takes that questioning and twists it into rebelliousness and fighting against God and making himself, saying that Job is making himself to be more righteous than God. But those are simply things that Job is not doing. He is not making those kinds of statements, and he is not implying those kinds of things. And then in verse 4 through 8, Elihu goes on to say, I will answer you and your companions with you. Look to the heavens and see, and behold the clouds, they are higher than you. If you sin, what do you accomplish against him? Or if your transgressions are multiplied, what do you do to him? If you are righteous, what do you give him? Or what does he receive from your hand? Your wickedness affects a man such as you, and your righteousness a son of man. Elihu says, and it's absolutely true, that God is above even the clouds. He's greater than the heavens. And whether man is righteous or whether he is wicked will not impact God and take away from God's power. You know, in the day of idolatry, especially in the time of the Greek gods, if you read Greek mythology, you'll find that a lot of the power for a Greek mythological god comes from how much they receive worship. And that if they are not worshiped enough, then they are not as strong as they should be. And that is a concept that many people take and apply to God, but that is not at all correct. God is all-powerful on His own. Whether I'm righteous or wicked, it's not going to take away from God's glory, majesty, and power. But God still wants me to be righteous. He still loves me, and it breaks His heart when I am wicked. And that is the driving force behind my Christianity, is I love God and do not want to let Him down. So we see there that Elihu understands that whether man is righteous or wicked, it does not affect God. But he's trying to twist that to say that, what is it to God? Therefore, God punishes man according to his physical works because it doesn't matter to God. Well, that's not how God works. It's not how He worked during the time of Job, and that's not how He works today. And then ending it in chapter 35, verse 9 through 16, at least for this part of our lesson tonight, he continues on in the next chapter, saying some more things that we'll look at next week. But he says, because of the multitude of oppressions that cry out, they cry out for the help because of the arm of the mighty. But no one says, where is God my maker, who gives songs in the night, who teaches us more than the beasts of the earth, and makes us wiser than the birds of heaven? There they cry out, but He does not answer, because of the pride of evil men. Surely God will not listen to empty talk, nor will the Almighty regard it. Although you say you do not see Him, yet justice is before Him, and you must wait for Him. And now because He is not punished in His anger, nor taken much notice of folly, therefore Job opens his mouth in vain, and he multiplies words without knowledge. Now here's where Elihu really does a low blow. Elihu says that Job is like a lot of other people who pray to God only when they're suffering. And they don't really have a true devotion to God. He says, you're just like them, Job. You don't have a true devotion to God. You're crying out to God now because you're in trouble. You don't really trust God. You're not really faithful to God. Elihu also says in verse 16 that Job opens his mouth in vain. And in verse 12 and 13, that's connected with the idea of prayer. Elihu says, you pray in vain. You don't mean your prayers. You call out to God, and then you wonder why God doesn't answer you. It's because your prayers are in vain. Because Job did say, this is one of the things that Elihu did hear Job say. Job was asking, where is God? Why will He not answer me? But he's taking that and he's saying, well, Job, the reason why God's not answering you is because you're a liar. And so he's accusing Job of being a vain worshiper of God. Kaufman commentary on verse 14 says, Job indeed had complained about his inability to find God. And Barnes believes that here Elihu says that although God is invisible, yet this should not be regarded as a reason why Job should not confide in Him. Yes, Job knew that God was there, but Job wanted to see God. That was what he was questioning. He wanted God to actually answer him. But that did not mean that Job did not confide in God. That did not mean that Job did not trust in God. Job was just in a bad place in his life, and he was crying out to God. And he wants to make this out to be all Job's fault. Job is doing this. Job is a wicked man. God is not listening to you because you're evil. And he's almost putting this idea out there at the end when he says he has not punished in his anger nor taken much notice in folly. He's saying, God hasn't really punished you completely for your wickedness, Job, and you should be grateful for that. That seems like kind of a slap in the face, because not only is he saying that, Job, you should be grateful for the trouble and the suffering you've had, but he's also contradicting himself, because he has already said that the wicked are punished for their wickedness. Well, if Job was truly being punished for his wickedness, then would God not have fully dealt his punishment? if what Elihu believes is true. So it's kind of a contradictory statement there that Elihu makes, where he says God punishes, but then at the same time God doesn't punish. Well, Elihu, what are you saying? You don't seem to be making sense with your ideology here. But when we look at these two chapters, we really see a young man who has been taught and misled by older men. He has followed after the way of Job's three friends. He has been caught up in false ideas and teaching. And that's something, no matter what age we are in, we need to be wary of. Be sure that we are not following after the teachings of men, but the teaching of God. And then we also see a little bit more about Job and his character and what kind of experience he is having and the doubts that he is having and how he has friends that are pulling him away from God and trying to get him to stumble. And we look at that and we think about ourselves. Have we ever doubted? Have we ever cried out to God? Have we ever had friends that tried to pull us away from God? Have we ever committed sin due to that stress or that trial or because of someone that we associate ourselves with? If that's the case, we need to make a change. We need to do what's right. We need to be like Job and withstand those trials and those persuasive words by friends. And maybe that requires certain actions on our part. Like maybe I'm here, you're here, and you have never obeyed Christ in baptism. You can do that right now. You've got to hear the word. Romans 10:17. Believe, repent, confess, and be baptized for the forgiveness of sins. Acts chapter 22, verse 16. You can step away from those old friends. You can step away from that sad depression. You can step away from that sin that you've committed, and you can walk a new life. And as we'll see at the end of the book of Job, a blessed life, a happy life. May not necessarily be in this physical life, but you'll have a wonderful home in heaven if you obey Christ in baptism. Perhaps you're a Christian already, but a friend has pulled you away, or a trial has ensnared you, a temptation has ensnared you, and you need to repent of that sin. You need to make that known. Or perhaps you just need encouragement and prayers of the church. You too can do something about that right now, tonight. Come forward as we stand and as we sing.